The strategies, techniques, and mannerisms of all card players serve to influence a game's outcome. In my observation, however, most players, sometimes even the professionals, routinely make 5 critical playstyle blunders. After becoming aware of these blunders, anyone, including you, can gain a significant edge in the world of cards. Would you like to learn of these 5 common mistakes? Show of hands? Obviously, I'm just kidding. Anyway, hang around and hopefully learn something new. Hey there, it's Sean here. I hope this evening finds you well. Today we'll be exploring 5 common card player mistakes and the techniques that you can use to exploit those mistakes. Now, these techniques are simple and straightforward, and you'll be able to put them into practice in short order. And as always, be sure to pop that subscribe button right there and post your comments below. Okay, let's do this. The first common card player mistake is the act of rearranging the cards in one's hand. For example, in games where several cards are held in the hand at once, games like euchre, 5-card draw, poker, gin, things like that, players will often rearrange the cards in their hand by suit, by matching numbers, and or in ascending or descending order, depending on the game and the player. Now, this practice is very unwise, as it can reveal to more astute players the constitution of one's hand. In fact, by surreptitiously watching your opponents during this reorganization phase, you can over time develop the ability to approximate what those players are holding. Moreover, most players, when drawing new cards, will insert those cards into their hand in the appropriate places, further suggesting what they hold. In summary, do not rearrange the cards in your hand. The second common card player mistake is the act of blindly following a set game plan. Players who use expressions like "I always do this" or "I always do that" in reference to gameplay generally are exposing their unwillingness to incorporate new information into their game tactics. Unlike those players, you should consider each new piece of information as it becomes available to you and use that information to guide your subsequent actions. Also, and in conjunction, you should maintain an element of unpredictability in your play style, as this will better conceal from your opponents the makeup of the cards you hold. For example, suppose you're playing 5-card draw poker and you're dealt 3 of a kind. In such a situation, the most mathematically feasible play is probably to discard 2 off cards and draw 2 new ones. However, by sometimes replacing only 1 of the off cards, you might mislead your opponents into believing that you hold 2 pair, or perhaps are on a straight or flush draw. In summary, always vary your gameplay. Do not blindly follow a set game plan. The third common mistake is the act of looking at one's hole cards multiple times. In Texas Hold'em especially, players routinely look back at their hands, which consist of only 2 cards, most often right after the flop is put into play, the flop being the first 3 community cards placed on the table. Remembering 2 cards of the same suit is only 3 pieces of information, the 2 cards and the 1 suit. Whereas remembering 2 cards of different suits is actually 5 pieces of information, the 2 cards, the 2 suits, and a correlation of each card to its suit. Because remembering 5 pieces of information requires more mental strength than does 3, Many people unintentionally reveal that they are either double-suited or single-suited simply by looking at, or by not looking at, their whole cards at inopportune times during the game, such as in the example here, right after the flop is put into play. In summary, do not look at your whole cards multiple times. The fourth common mistake is the act of failing to watch one's opponents at critical times during the game. Now what I mean is, the overwhelming majority of card players are most concerned with the value of their own hands. They are much more eager to peek at their own whole cards or to watch new cards as they're being flipped over, etc., than they are to observe the other things happening at the table, these things being primarily the mannerisms of their opponents. You should avoid this impulse as it can cheat you out of pertinent information. You should focus on the actual cards only after all opportunities to discern your opponent's reactions have passed. For example, in 7-card stud, as new cards are being dealt face up to each of your opponents, watch that player for any kind of response he or she might have to receiving that card first. Then look at the card itself second, because looking at the card and then the player, you miss out on that player's reaction. In summary, whenever an opponent's hand is about to change in value, watch that player for any sort of reaction above all else. Do not worry so much about your own cards. The fifth and final common mistake frequently made by most card players is the act of making decisions based on emotion, boredom, and/or distraction. When the hour is late, the alcohol is flowing, and tempers are high, and cell phones abound, some players succumb to the whimsicality of making plays that they would not normally make for reasons not bound by logic. They play a hand because they folded the last 20. Or they call a trick because they weren't paying attention. Or they re-raise because they don't like the person who raised originally, and so on. And on that last point, in regard to emotion especially, watch any of those poker television shows and you'll see what a negative influence emotion can have on certain professional card players. They just don't seem to get it. For yourself, however, simply by maintaining a calm composure can you avoid the emotional pitfalls that seem to very often snare these professional players, and thus you greatly improve the efficacy of your own gameplay. In summary, base your gameplay decisions on reason. Do not base them on emotion, boredom, or distraction. And there we have it. This methodology is, of course, by no means comprehensive, but diligent execution of these practices should bear fruit at the card table. If you found this video helpful, or would like to share some suggestions of your own, feel free to post your feedback in the comment section below. And as always, I invite you to like and subscribe. I always appreciate that. And lastly, before we conclude, the word of the day is paucity. Paucity. The presence of something only in small or insufficient quantities or amounts. Keep your eye on the prize, and I will see you next time.